Hello, Planet Earth. Welcome to my YouTube channel. We're at Maddie K. My BFF Jill 730.
My BFF
Jill
730.
I'm Preston L. Young, wishing you warm salutations and congratulations. As always, you've made your way to the Buffington Post. So today I'll be taking a break from Buffy because I want to talk to you guys about Lev Grossman's The Magicians, the first novel, which has like 4 books in it, in the Magicians trilogy. I really enjoyed the sci-fi show by the same title, based on the book, and so I picked up all 3 books, and maybe that wasn't such a good idea, but we'll talk about that more in the review, so stay tuned because here we go.
You are invited!
Butterfly in the sky, I can go twice as high. Take a look, it's in a book, a reading rainbow. I can go anywhere, friends to know and ways to grow, a reading rainbow. I can be anything. Take a look, it's in a book, a reading rainbow. A reading rainbow.
The book is called The Magicians, but I feel like it's missing a subtitle, which is #First World Problem. The story follows Quentin Coldwater, who is about to graduate from high school, and he is trying to go and apply to like Ivy League schools. And this is kind of the problem with this book. It's kind of unrelatable. Quentin is kind of unrelatable. In many respects, he's quite relatable if you are someone who feels like an outsider or just a nerd who's obsessed with like your own fandom, and the book really does deal with fandom and fiction and how the stories from our childhood can give us these ideas and lofty expectations of reality or even fantasy, and the real world just not living up to this kind of higher ideal that you've made for yourself. And in particular, Quentin, our narrator slash main character. And actually, he's not a narrator at all. It's written in the third person for his perspective, okay? And so the book's language is almost overwritten, and it just kind of goes on and on and on, and it uses a lot of like lofty language, but that kind of actually works because Quentin is such a like, genius level guy. He has all these like fancy math skills, and he's just, you know, like this Ivy Leaguer, and he's like the best and the brightest and all this good stuff. And so the language that he would use is the language that is used in the books, but it's all kind of pretentious. It's like I said, overwritten. It's aiming really high, just like Quentin is aiming really high. He's got these, like I said, lofty expectations of what this magic that he finds himself in is, you know, for and going to get him. And so in many respects, Quentin is an unlikable character. He is someone who, like I said, #First World Problems. He can never achieve happiness. He's always talking about how happiness is always just one step away, and as soon as you think you're going to get what you want, it turns to shit and it's not anything like you expected, which can be an interesting layer to take your character through and dig through, but there's like 8 years of time here. He starts as like a 17-year-old, he spends 5 years in Brakebills, and then he spends like 2 years in Fillory, and then he comes back and he is, you know, in the normal world, and throughout his Brakebills time and throughout his Fillory time and then back in his real world time, he's never happy. Like, nothing ever satisfies him. It's very, like I said, first world problems. Like, Quentin refuses to be satisfied, and that's kind of not fair. It's because he doesn't know how to be satisfied with his circumstances based on kind of these what he feels like he's been promised by Fillory. And so the book is just kind of all over the place. And if you've watched the show, you know that eventually they go to Fillory. And Fillory doesn't make a whole lot of sense in the show, but once you get into Fillory in the novel, there's no logic to it. Like, nothing really makes sense, which I guess is kind of the point, because it's this fantasy world and it's not at all what they were expecting. But the logic and the kind of rules and the laws of Fillory, they're not explained enough for you to be really invested. There are certain interpersonal relationships between the characters. There's Quentin and Janet and Alice and Elliot and Josh and this French girl whose name I could never pronounce in my head when I was reading. And there are, like I said, these interpersonal relationships between the characters, which are really the only thing to kind of invest in. Your main character, he is really moody, he's just completely dissatisfied, and he looks down on other people. He puts himself on this pedestal and just kind of looks down at all the petty, common people who just don't understand his angst. And there is a certain relatability in that, you know, if you feel like the smartest person in the room, you are just going to kind of dismiss everyone. But Quentin is just unlikable, and that keeps you in the book because you're wondering, is he ever going to be fucking satisfied? And by the end, it's like he realizes that he's not going to be satisfied, and so why not go and not be satisfied in a place that's more fun? Like, that's where the book ends. It's like, okay, you're not satisfied, but why not be unsatisfied with people who share the same interests and curiosities as yourself? And so I feel like there is something bigger going on. I feel like it is talking about, sure, you may never be satisfied, but that's fine as long as you keep living and keep exploring. It's got a very kind of existential narrative to it. It's not supposed to get you anywhere, and it's not supposed to satisfy you. It's just supposed to keep you going. And I think, if anything, that's what the book does really well. It just says, here are your lumps, you can take them and, you know, deal with them, or you can just feel like shit about yourself. And Quentin, for most of this novel, just feels like shit about himself. Whereas by the end, he still doesn't really like his circumstances, but he's going to try and at least embark on something new with people from his past and hopefully throughout his future. Now, the time element of this novel, I think, is its weakest point. We go through 5 years of magic school before the book even hits, like, 2/3 of the way through. It's really odd. There's all of the kind of ins and outs and intricacies of Brakebills, this magical college, aren't explored enough for you to really invest in Brakebills, because you just don't learn a whole lot about it, like the course structure and all this good stuff. There are neat ways when we get to Antarctica to look at magic, and it wasn't until we were in Antarctica that I felt like, oh, I'm starting to understand magic. And you, the reader, don't really understand the way that magic is supposed to work and feel until Quentin himself does, which is something that the book does well. But at the same time, all of these 5 years in Brakebills are kind of unnecessary, or at least they should have been stretched out for the entirety of the book. I get that the point is to get to Fillory and to have all of the, like, Fillory rug pulled out from under you and have to look at the, you know, reality of it. But when we get to Fillory, it just, like I said, it's illogical. None of it really makes a shit ton of sense, and everything gets wrapped up so quickly once they get into Fillory and have this kind of, like, battle. I don't know, like, somebody comes along and explains, like, oh, what the whole do-to-do was, and it's just not satisfying. I feel like the show has its flaws, but it does a better job of allowing you to connect with these characters and actually like Quentin. Quentin, you can enjoy him, you can enjoy his attitude and his curiosity about things and his frustration, but you can't really like him. He's not likable. Where the show really makes him endearing and likable, and it seems in the show that he's not just, beating it to himself. He's very much condescending in the book. I don't know. There's something about this book that does not work, and I, like a dumbass, went ahead and bought the other two books when I picked up The Magicians because I loved the show, and so I'm going to, power through The Magician's King and The Magician's Land, and hopefully Grossman will have received the criticisms of the first and made up for them, and I'll get back to you after I read The Magician's King. But I can't say it's a bad book. I can't say it's bad because there are really interesting character moments and there are really interesting ideas at play, but none of them ever really satisfy. But again, to its credit, it's a book about not being satisfied. Again, like first world problems, like how can you just try and be happy and accept your circumstances? And for the most part, it's fine, but it's not for everyone. So if you've read The Magicians, let me know what you thought of it. Let me know what you thought of the sci-fi adaptation of the show, or of the books, and if you think it's better or worse or whatever, down in the comment section below. But it's pretty much all I've got for you guys today. I don't really do book reviews. I've kind of gotten out of reading novels, and so I will give this to The Magicians. It inspired me to go out and read another novel, so yay. But yeah, it's not the worst, but there are serious flaws in the way that the story is told and how it's just like you can't understand anything. And again, I don't know if that's just like going over my head because, maybe Lev Grossman is actually the secret genius or whatnot, but there's no connection, and I get it, like Quentin can't really connect, but it's a frustrating book, and that is, again, connected to Quentin's frustration, and so I don't know if it's supposed to leave you feeling so frustrated or if it's supposed to make you feel great by the end. But either way, the book just doesn't satisfy, and I think that has more to do with who the story is about, somebody who just refuses to be satisfied. So let me know what you thought of the book down in the comment section below. I'm Preston L. Young. You can come right back here to the Buffington Post anytime for Buffy the Vampire Slayer reviews, Angel and Faith reviews, Buffyverse discussions, discussions on the other Slayers, and more. Have a great day today, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Butterfly in the sky, I can go twice as high. Take a look, it's in a book, a reading rainbow. I can go anywhere, friends to know and ways to grow, a reading rainbow.